The suicidal stance of the Romantics was part of their earliest legacy. The English poet Thomas Chatterton took his life at the age of 18 in 1770. The influence of his death and the circumstances of his death, unrecognized genius, near starvation in a garret, final release through a large dose of arsenic, were the stuff that Romantic poetry was made of. The influence of his death on Romantic youth was as lethal as the poison he had swallowed. Dramatic and early death was regarded as a mark of true genius in creative circles, though not everyone was impressed. The trouble began with Chatterton. Since that little fool saw fit to poison himself to the frantic applause of a still more foolish audience, certain young men have been made mad enough to follow his example. They think that suicide is still the best way to prove one's genius. As the movement gathered adherents and followers all over Europe, less dramatic methods of flaunting one's romantic leanings evolved. Clothes became a powerful proclamation of one's political and artistic stance. The most important thing was not to dress like the bourgeoisie, not to behave like the bourgeoisie, not to think like the bourgeoisie. Dress, love, death, politics were all romanticized.
And so you'll write your odes to the moon and curse the selfish century which will not support you while you're idle.
The question asked by Monsieur Durandin to Rudolph in the first act of La Vie de Bohème sums up the Philistine's resentment of the romantic who wishes to dedicate his life to nature and art and truth and beauty. Byron exclaims with relish,
"I was born a child of anger."
The early years are years of literary and political revolution, and the French romantics follow where the English romantics had led. Byron, the wandering child Harold, leads a dissolute existence and dies in the Greek War of Independence, age 36. Shelley proclaims and practices his belief in free love. Whatever form the romantic selects, the important thing is to assert the right of man to live as he chooses. The creative artist can only gain from freedom. In France, Théophile Gautier recalls that
in every group there is a pivotal character, round whom the rest are implanted and revolve like a system of planets around their star. Petrus Borel was that star. None of us attempted to resist that attraction.
Un pauvre qui dérobe par nécessité.
A poor man who steals by necessity the smallest object is put into prison. But shopkeepers are permitted by law to open their shops on the streets and rob the innocent people who pass by. Those thieves have no special keys or iron blades, none of the usual tools for robbery. No, they have scales, cash registers, pads and pencils, and no one who enters leaves without thinking to himself, "I have just been robbed." And little by little, these robbers become rich. They become proprietors, the most privileged of thieves. I don't believe that anyone can become rich unless he is fierce and tough. A sensitive man can never accumulate great wealth. To become rich, a man must have one goal, an obsession that is hard and immutable. He must desire to build a mountain of gold, and then to hold on to that mountain of gold, he needs to be an extortionist, a swindler, and a murderer of hearts and minds.
The revolt taking place in literature in 1830 is also taking place in the streets. The aristocracy of intellect struggles for power with the aristocracy of birth. The members of Borel's group are Republicans whose only arms are their pens, their paintbrushes, and their chisels.
If I talk of republicanism, it is because that word represents for me the greatest amount of liberty which civilization and society can provide. And I need an enormous amount of liberty.
1830. The romantic storm erupts in Paris. Two revolutions mark this fateful year. In February, the first presentation of Victor Hugo's drama Hernani explosively announces to an aghast public the arrival of the romantic spirit. Some months later, in July, Charles X, whose self-conceit is immortalized by the painter Ingres, is overthrown by the three-day revolution. Delacroix has left us an allegory of the event. The theatrical revolution and the political revolution, though apparently unconnected, share the same ambition: the seizure of a new liberty and the rejection of worn-out restrictions and threadbare traditions. Charles X flees. His successor, Louis-Philippe, to whom Horace Vernet rendered a not-so-flattering homage, inaugurates a bourgeois monarchy which squashes radical hopes. The legitimist society, faithful to the fallen king, resents the new regime and withdraws to the haughty isolation of the large townhouses of the Faubourg Saint-Germain. If Romanticism, basically an anarchic movement, paradoxically infiltrates from the beginning this closed and elitist milieu, it is thanks to such poets as Alfred de Musset and the fashionable aristocrats who surround him. But it is also because this society apart, by exalting the concept of individualism, is in conflict with the egalitarian ideas of revolution. Romanticism erupted in France in 1830, but Romanticism was born long before this date, taking root in England and in Germany towards the close of the 18th century. Shelley defined the new conception of man.
Man is an instrument that receives interior and exterior impressions and sensations, as the gusts of an ever-changing wind on the Aeolian lyre draw from it an ever-changing melody. The most divine song can be heard when the breath of the universal spirit barely touches the strings.
In Germany, Novalis proclaimed,
"The world must be romanticized. It is only thus that man shall regain his original force. Romanticism is nothing but the uprising of human potential."
In France, the poet and critic Baudelaire was undeniably one of the first to have a clear and uncompromising vision of what Romanticism meant and could mean.
Il y a autant de beauté que de manière habituelle de chercher le bonheur.
For me, Romanticism is the most recent, the most real expression of the beautiful. Few people today wish to give this word a real and positive meaning. But will they dare to suggest that a whole generation consents to surrender a battle of several years for a flag that means nothing? Let us remember the troubles of these last years, and we shall see that if little remains of the Romantics, it is because very few of them found Romanticism, but all sought it, loyally and sincerely.
La philosophie moderne explique ceci clairement.
There are as many ideals as there are ways of seeking happiness.
Qu'il y a eu pour les peuples de façon de comprendre la morale, l'amour, la religion, etc.
Romanticism is not a precise term, but an entire conception.
Mais dans une conception analogue à la morale du siècle.
He who says Romanticism says modern art. That is to say, intimacy, spirituality, aspiration towards the infinite, and color, all conveyed by the various means that the arts can offer. Romanticism does not reside in the choice of subject. Romanticism is instead a way of feeling.
Goethe inaugurates the new attitude when, at the end of the 18th century, he writes his partly autobiographical novel, The Sufferings of Young Werther, a novel which immediately provokes a wave of imitation suicides amongst young lovers who identify with the lovelorn hero. The Romantics' notion of man's destiny was in fact inseparable from a longing for an ideal love and an inaccessible happiness. In a letter to the woman he loves, Goethe succumbs to an excess of passion.
My friend, when darkness closes in on me, and the earth and sky fill my soul like the face of a beloved mistress, I wish that this paper could give vent to all the emotions that live so strongly and ardently within me. If only it could become the mirror of my soul, as your soul is the mirror of the infinite God.
In this overwrought emotional climate, Romanticism redefines woman according to a new formula. She becomes either angel or demon, pure or fatal. Pure is Balzac's Duchesse de Langeais. Fatal is Mérimée Venus d'Ille, or his Carmen. The two different types of woman sketched by De Vere. The dramatization of feelings leads to a theatricalization of attitudes and to an overblown exaggeration of language. The romantic woman belonging to this mode lives only for a great and tragic love. Here, Alfred de Musset, a poet who fell in love as other people catch colds, pens a delicious parody of the romantic woman's letter of goodbye.
Mon amour adoré, mon ange. Consider, my adored love, my angel, my own, my heart, my life. You whom I idolize with all the power of my soul. You, my life and my death.
Et mes larmes, toi, ma vie et ma mort. Jusqu'à quel excès effroyable tu as...
To what terrible excess you have insulted and ignored the noble sentiments of which your heart is full.
La sauvegarde de l'homme.
You have been betrayed, and you have betrayed. You have been deceived, and you have deceived. You have been wounded, and you have wounded in your turn. You have shed blood, and you have struck a blow. Now all hope has fled from us.
But de Musset is all sincerity when he writes,
Nothing makes us greater than a great sorrow. The most despairing songs are the most beautiful.
Like romantic types, romantic fashion falls into two categories. The romantics are in prophetic agreement with Oscar Wilde.
Only shallow people do not judge by appearances.
The romantic wardrobe immediately signals the politics and the beliefs of the wearer. There is the romantic woman who chooses the bulky extravagance of medieval dress, a reaction against the shift-like neoclassical tunics of the First Empire. The ample robes and large voluminous sleeves emphasize femininity. And then there is the other type, the bohemian romantic woman, personified by the novelist Georges Sand. Her lovers are legion. She wears men's clothes. She smokes. She creates the concept of the romantic woman known as the lion. Languid, pale-skinned women are the ideal of beauty at the time. The milky complexion of certain British women is much admired. But paleness was often a symptom of tuberculosis. Marie Duplessis, the Lady of the Camellias, symbolizes the duality of the romantic woman. Her whoredom is redeemed by her death, which sanctifies her. Among romantic men, clothes are a powerful definition of their taste in politics and in art. The crucial thing is not to dress like the bourgeoisie. Their clothes, even when they are fantastic, are carefully planned down to the last detail. Nothing is left to chance. The dandy becomes an admired and much imitated figure in romantic circles. The influence of England is strong. Delacroix wears only clothes made of English cloth, cut by an English tailor. The example of Beau Brummel led to a kind of uniform among romantics. A tight-fitting frock coat, padded at the chest and shoulders, and pinched in at the waist is de rigueur. To achieve the desired narrowness, the dandy wears what is virtually a corset, a whaleboned waistcoat.
I ate nothing, out of respect for the whalebones of my waistcoat. If I were to receive communion, I'd burst.
Contrary to romantic ideals, in France, an era of financial prosperity reflects the materialistic aims of the July monarchy and consolidates the throne of Louis Philippe. The banks flourish. The bourgeoisie sees its investment bear fruit. There begins a lust to become rich quickly. The Romantics fight this appetite for material wealth with the only weapon they have, art. Shelley affirms,
poetry is never more necessary than during those periods in which, because of an excess of egoism and the love of gain, the accumulation of consumer wealth exceeds that which the laws of nature allow man to assimilate.
And Byron demands,
what use is poetry except to create from an excess of sentiments good and evil, and to aim towards an exterior life beyond our destiny, and to be the new Prometheus of new man.
With an era of economic prosperity, technical and industrial progress advances by great strides. The first modern factories rear up. William Blake has a grim vision of the havoc that industry will wreak on human life.
There is the cave, the rock, the tree, the lake of Ood and Adan, the forest and the marsh and the pits of bitumen deadly, the islands of the fiery lakes, the trees of malice, revenge and black anxiety, and the cities of the salamandrine men. The land of darkness, flamed, but no light and no repose. The land of snows, of trembling, and of iron hail incessant. The land of earthquakes, and the land of woven labyrinths. The land of snares, and traps, and wheels, and pitfalls, and dire mills.
From the 1830s on, the first railways began to function. Believing that nothing less than a return to nature could return man to the roots of his experience and his inspiration, the Romantics fought against the machine's invasion of daily life. For the Romantics, the worlds of money and banks, industrial prosperity and technical inventions are all damned. They despise it all, and so they entangle themselves in a contradiction. Fierce advocates of social progress, they reject the technical progress which could in fact transform society. With minds at once revolutionary and retrograde, the Romantics turn with melancholy away from life toward the cloudy mysteries of infinity. Thirsting after pure absolutes, they are overcome by the dizziness that afflicts man confronted with the mysteries of his origins. And the revolutionary aspirations born with Romanticism never completely cancel out an innate but contradictory sense of the divine. But through their need to escape from the constraints of the materialistic world, the Romantics formulate new ways of expressing a metaphysical, spiritual response to existence. Wordsworth declares,
to every natural form, rock, fruit or flower, even the loose stones that cover the highway, I gave a moral life. I saw them feel, or linked them to some feeling. The great mass lay bedded in a quickening soul, and all that I beheld respired with inward meaning.
The rejection of the industrial civilization encourages the Romantics to turn away from the present towards the past. Since the closing years of the 18th century, particularly in England, a new interest had been stirring. For the first time since the Renaissance, there was the beginnings of an admiration for Gothic architectural remains. Previously considered barbaric, now the Gothic begins to oust the strict outlines of the classical style. By degrees, the curiosity aroused by ruins turns into a veritable infatuation for the Middle Ages. Goethe praises the beauty of the cathedral at Strasbourg. And Sir Walter Scott steeps his novels in a phantasmagoric universe of besieged fortresses, haunted chapels, and the pomp and ceremony of medieval tournaments. Dressing up in medieval costume becomes the rage amongst the English gentry, and medievalism is the motive for a ball at Buckingham Palace. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert are shown in Landseer's painting, striving in a picturesque fashion to recreate the look, if not the spirit, of England's long-dead age of chivalry. In France, the passion for medieval architecture leads Viollet-le-Duc to restore the abbey at Vézelay. His restorations show the infatuation of the Romantics for the Gothic style, as well as the Romantic tendency to excess.
Restoration. The word and the thing are modern. To restore an edifice is not to maintain it, to repair it, or to remake it. It means to re-establish it to a complete state which has never before existed.
Viollet-le-Duc exceeded the restorer's brief when he added a spire to Notre Dame. Restorations bring to light the splendors of a misunderstood past and have a crucial influence on the Romantics' infatuation for the Gothic style. Under the influence of Viollet-le-Duc, there rose up in Paris numerous facades in which Gothic and Renaissance styles are freely intermingled. The taste for neo-Gothic style breaks out among the well-to-do members of the general public. The furniture and objects dubbed cathedral furniture take over interior decor. The troubadour style is king. The visions of the Middle Ages conjured up in architecture began and ended in literature. When Victor Hugo chooses Notre Dame as the setting for his novel, it is out of a need to depict a period in which
drama is epic, the picturesque is concrete, the real is ideal, true, yes great. When Walter Scott becomes Homeric.
But Romantic painting must do more than create pseudo-historical evocations.
S'appeler romantique,
But to call oneself a romantic and to look systematically at the past is to contradict oneself. Some blaspheme the Greeks and the Romans in the name of Romanticism. But you can only make Romans and Greeks into romantics if you are one yourself.
le romantisme et la couleur me conduisent droit à...
Romanticism and color lead me straight to Eugène Delacroix. I do not know if he is proud of his title of romantic, but his place is here.
La majorité du public, là, depuis longtemps,
because a long time ago, from his very first work, in fact, the majority of the public placed him at the head of the modern school. Up to the present, Eugène Delacroix has met with injustice. Criticism, for him, has been bitter and ignorant. With one or two noble exceptions, even the praise of his admirers must often have shocked him.
Et pour la plupart des gens,
For most people, to mention Eugène Delacroix is to throw into their minds goodness knows what vague ideas of ill-directed fire, of turbulence, of hazardous inspiration.
De désordre même.
And for those fine gentlemen who form the majority of the public, chance plays an important part in his happiest compositions.
Un grand rôle dans ses plus heureuses compositions.
But the most remarkable quality in the work of Delacroix, that which makes him the true painter of the 19th century,
Fait de lui le vrai peintre du 19e siècle. C'est cette mélancolie singulière,
is the unique and persistent melancholy with which all his works are imbued, and which is revealed in his choice of subject, in the expression of his faces, in gesture and in style of color. Delacroix has a fondness for Dante and Shakespeare, two other great painters of human anguish. He knows them through and through, and is able to draw from them freely. He is unrivaled in expressing not merely suffering, but above all, moral suffering. And here lies the prodigious mystery of his painting. This lofty and serious melancholy of his shines with a gloomy brilliance.
Romanticism forged several keys by which to escape the banality of everyday life. Out of their wish to return to the past, to escape the present, came Baudelaire's The Journey. For the poet, it's an imaginary prelude to the siren call of faraway countries.
The true travellers are they who depart for departing's sake, with hearts light as balloons. They never swerve from their destinies, saying continuously, without knowing why, let us go on. Oh, marvelous travellers, what glorious stories we read in your eyes as deep as the seas. Show us the caskets of your rich memories, those wonderful jewels of stars and stratosphere. We would travel without wind or sail, and so, to gladden the cares of our jails, pass over our spirits, stretched out like canvas, your memories with their frames of horizons. Tell us, what have you seen?
In 1830, following a diplomatic incident, France launches itself into the conquest of Algeria. While the African continent had for a long time aroused in the French a certain curiosity, Napoleon's campaigns in Egypt have magnified this into a positive thirst for exoticism. More recently, the French and the English had taken a keen interest in the Greek War of Independence, fought against the Turks in the 1820s. In 1824, Byron dies at Missolonghi, fighting for the Greeks. Delacroix leaves us a powerful memento of this conflict in his Massacre at Chios. Delacroix returns from North Africa with sketchbooks recording the vivid impressions that the country made on him. Baudelaire writes of them,
"A journey to Morocco seems to have left a deep impression on his mind. There he could study at leisure both man and woman in their independence and native originality of movement, and could comprehend antique beauty in the sight of a race pure of all base breeding and adorned with health and the free development of its muscles.
The sketches are inspiration for some of Delacroix's greatest works. But what the Romantic era owed above all to the Orient was exotic decor, colourful visions, and passionate scenes. Following in Delacroix's footsteps, painters of less talent called little masters from all over Europe perpetuate this taste for visionary horizons which gave birth to a full-blown Orientalism. Romantic sculpture falls short of the possibilities opened up by paintings and literature. Perhaps the nearest anyone comes to a masterpiece of Romantic sculpture is Auguste Rodin. On the principal facade of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, a rather cold and pompous edifice, is the vigorous group called the Marseillaise. The placing of the main figures, dominated by an allegory of militant liberty, gives an impression of a great vitality and force driven onward by a liberating blast of wind. With this relief, Rodin gives us a glimpse of what a school of Romantic sculpture might have achieved. Whilst pursuing their ideals of absolute happiness, beauty, and feeling, the Romantics never lose their morbid curiosity in alarming or deformed creatures, in phantoms and monsters, and in violent death. It is a strain in Romanticism that originated in England and Germany, rising out of old haunted stones and the eerie magic of the ancient lands of moor and forests. The poet invents a character who personifies the burden of subconscious terrors seething in the minds of people perched on the threshold of a new age. Her Frankenstein is still a potent myth for our times. In Germany, E.T.A. Hoffmann writes his tales. Their fantastic and morbid atmosphere inspire the Frenchman Gavani to make illustrations which capture their disturbing ambivalence. And finally, France, which until this period resisted everything to do with the irrational, succumbs to the thrilling glooms of Romanticism. Charles Nodier with his Contes Fantastiques, Aloysius Bertrand with Gaspard de la Nuit, Victor Hugo with Quasimodo win over a huge public with a literature poised on the frontier of the real and the unreal, of life and death. Fuseli prizes open a door leading into the corridor of nightmare. Novalis declares,
"The life of a cultivated man should take place between music and non-music, just as it takes place between waking and sleeping."
Hoffmann adds,
"I close my eyes to all wars and all the struggles in the world, and I withdraw to the kingdom of music, land where our torments and our doubts are submerged in an ocean of sounds."
Romantic music is full of the same excesses and the same violence as is Romantic literature and Romantic painting. The conquest of Europe by Romanticism is achieved largely through music. Hoffmann, who from the beginning championed Beethoven's music, places it at the heart of Romanticism.
Beethoven's music releases fear, terror, horror, and suffering, and stirred the infinite nostalgia that is the essence of Romanticism. Beethoven is a completely romantic composer.
Germany becomes the favored country for Romantic music. In France, Berlioz leads a remorseless struggle for the recognition of Beethoven's greatness. Music offers the Romantics an escape route from a life in which greed reigns supreme. The desire for an inaccessible elsewhere is seen as the only way to preserve intact one's soul. But there is a gradual absorption of the Romantic attitude by the wide public. And through this process of dissemination, the core of Romanticism loses its force and results in the triumph not of Romanticism, but of sentimentality. Like Emma Bovary, society ladies eagerly devour novels full of romantic props.
All love, lovers, paramours, persecuted ladies fainting in lonely pavilions, postilions killed at every relay, horses ridden to death on every page, somber forests, heartaches, vows, sobs, tears and kisses, and gentlemen brave as lions.
Sentimental songs were all the rage. Easier to play and to sing than the leader of the great composers, they turned the nostalgia of Romanticism into the banal. In spite of an initial recoil away from the fiery passions of the Romantic spirit, the Romantic style, at any rate, infiltrates thousands of homes all over Europe. An important factor in this process are the illustrations of Gustave Doré. While adults thrilled at his renderings of Dante's Inferno, children were treated to Doré versions of Fontaine's Fables or the Bible.
Au bout de 40 jours, Noé ouvrit la fenêtre qu'il avait fait à l'arche.
After 40 days, Noah opened the window he had made in the ark, and he released the crow, who came and went while waiting for the waters to dry on the land. Then he released the dove to see if the waters had diminished.
La colombe revint vers lui sur le soir. Et voici qu'elle avait dans le bec un rameau tout frais d'olivier. Ainsi, Noé connut que les eaux avaient diminué à la surface de la terre. Il attendit encore 7 autres jours et lâcha la colombe qui ne revint plus vers lui. C'est en l'an 601 de la vie de Noé, au 1er mois, le 1er du mois, que les eaux séchèrent sur la terre. Noé enleva la couverture de l'arche.
Noah lifted up the shutters of the ark. He looked and saw that the ground was dry.
Gustave Doré was born in 1832, 2 years after the Battle of Hernani. His youth had been nurtured by the Romantic spirit, but by the time he starts on his career, the golden age of Romanticism is already on the wane. But the powerful and haunting images of Doré prolong the Romantic spell and make it part of the experience of a far wider public. 2 series of illustrations assure his fame. His illustrations to Perrault's Tales and his Fables of La Fontaine. By mid-century, there is nothing left for Romanticism to conquer. Even the classical ballet falls prey to the enthusiasm for all things romantic. Ballets like Giselle and La Sylphide celebrate all the traumas of unrequited love and the spasms of the heart that lead lovers on the road from life to death. By the end of the 1840s, Romanticism has established its dominion throughout Europe. It is not able to halt the progress of the machine age or trim the power of the banks, but it marks the era with an indelible brand. But it is precisely because of the scope of its victory that it dies. Popularization softens its original vehemence, muffles its impact. The ideals of Romanticism become tamed until it is nothing more than an affectation, a passing phase. But the Romantics had seized for the artists that succeeded them a kind of freedom. For one last bound, the Revolution of February 1848 banishes Louis Philippe from the throne and reanimates the enthusiasm of fighting spirits. One of the most fervent partisans is the poet Lamartine. But the coup d'etat of Louis Napoleon Bonaparte ends the shaky Second Republic. Faced with this final failure to establish a true democracy in Europe, the pioneers of Romanticism exclaim with Coleridge,
"Forgive me, liberty, oh forgive me these dreams. I hear your voice, I hear thy loud lament."
Romanticism disrupts the certainties of 18th century thought. In doing so, it opens the way to modern man by releasing him from sterile and arbitrary standards and restrictions. In emphasizing the force of youth, it makes a sun of hope blaze momentarily on the horizon.
A light, a glory, a fair luminous cloud envelops the earth.
Romanticism was the most pervasive, most accessible, most comprehensive upheaval in art and life that there had ever been. Even the bourgeoisie were pulled into the romantic whirlpool. La vie bohème altered the way that people dressed, talked, ate, loved at all levels of society. Little by little, the old autocracy of art was corroded. Art happened on the streets as well as in the salons. Not even the nursery was immune. The brooding young man on the mountaintop became everyone's idea of creative genius. But his influence shook European life and thought to its foundation.